No, no, no. The the prairie is further south from here. I'm living in
Oh,
the North Woods,
the
so that
North
makes me a
Woods.
woodsman.
Okay. A woodsman.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that yeah. This prairie is southern Minnesota, so
Okay.
that makes me a woodsman.
A woodsman. Okay. That's 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 legendary. Okay.
Otherwise, practically a Canadian.
What?
I said,
Yeah.
otherwise,
Well,
practically a Canadian.
Practically a Canadian, true. Yeah.
you still got to go about 200 miles to get to the Canadian border, but yeah, I'm pretty far north.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay.
I heard
We
you said
are
200 miles from the Canadian border also.
okay. We are in Pirkei Avot, which applies even past the Canadian border, wherever you might find yourself. And if you're using, if you happen to be using this edition, this is the Quran edition. It is chapter four, number eight. Chapter four, Mishnah eight. But I think it's different in the Safaria, which I posted. It's a little bit different. I think it's six. And again, the reason why they differ is because sometimes they chop up the missions differently. So that's why. Um, okay, we're up to Rabbi Yosei. Um, I don't know. I don't know why these names. It always make me sad that some of these names have gone out of. Yosei is a great name, but I don't think anybody uses the name Yosei anymore. You get Yossi and Yosef, whatever, but you don't get Yosei. So Rabbi Yosei Omer, call a mechabed the Torah. Any person who who honors the Torah, gufo mechubad al briot. He says. Um, Goof, it's hard to translate it. Gufo means, I guess probably here means um, uh, himself will be honored by mankind, or literally by creatures. We talked about that before. Briot, which means literally creatures, is often used to mankind, but it's kind of the lowest level of mankind. So all people of all different kinds of backgrounds, all different kinds of levels. Will honor the person who honors the Torah. Called Mechalet the Torah. Any person who profanes or disgraces the Torah, Gufo Mechalel Briot. He says will in turn be disgraced by mankind. So if you are right, if you give honor, if you give honor to the Torah, then you will get honor from other people. If you if you if you are if you disgrace the Torah, then you'll be disgraced. You'll be disgraced by uh, other people. And it's interesting also that this is being written. These were things that were probably said. These are things that were probably said to their students. Um, and what does that message mean to a scholar, a scholar of Torah? Like how can you say, okay, how you know how would you give honor to the Torah? How would you disgrace it? Well, maybe by your behavior, right? If you were, I know, if you're behaving, if you're a Torah scholar, right, and you're behaving in a way which is proper and respectable, and people and and generous and so forth, then that brings honor to the Torah, and therefore bring honor from other people also because they appreciate it. Um, but how would you disgrace the Torah? Disgrace the Torah by by bad behavior. Reminds me also, don't let me forget Malka. Don't let me forget that we have to arrange Shmu's time. I just thought of that. So what do we think about the Mishnah? Short Mishnah. Okay. Well, we're plowing on. Okay. Okay, Rabbi Yishmael again. Okay, Rabbi Yishmael Beno. So remember this name, this so, um, names. I think if you look here, um, okay, so Rabbi Yishmael, his son. Um, so remember that name Yishmael or Ismail. He was much more popular in those days. Rabbi Yishmael ben Omer, Rabbi Yishmael, his son said, "Hachoshech atzmo min, as in Hachoshech atzmo, sorry, Hachosech, Hachosech atzmo min adin." A person should avoid judgment. A person should avoid being a judge. Porek says and explains Porek mimenu. This is Eva v'gezel v'shvat shava, because a person who avoids serving as a judge um, uh, spares himself enmity. That's a good it's Eva or enmity or uh, Eva is like sort of like is conflict, like having conflict with other people, um, robbery and false oaths, right? Because a person who, if you don't get yourself involved in being a judge, I imagine, this is I imagine again talking to scholars, right? That one of the things you can do as a scholar is you can act as a dayan, you can act as a judge. He says, well, if you take on that position, you put yourself closer to first of all, people are gonna be upset with you, right? There's no way, people are gonna be upset with you. And whether your ruling is right or your ruling is wrong, right? If you're called on to make a ruling, you're going to hurt somebody. That's that's true. And also, if you make a mistake, or if you'll be tempted with bribes, there's all sorts of, whenever there's money involved, okay, there's also the possibility of thievery. And lastly, you're asking people to take oaths. It's a very big part of Jewish justice is having people make oaths, right? And it's kind of carried into Western justice systems also, right? This idea of this swearing. Um, but the problem is that if you swear and you swear by the name of God and you're lying, that person's committed a sin. So you really want to avoid, excuse me, you really want to avoid making anybody swear because you really could be encouraging them to say the name of God in vain and committing a very big sin. So the best way to do that is to avoid getting involved
Uh,
in being a judge. The gam libo v'hara, gam libo, a person who is confident in this, a person who's really um, his heart is in it. It says shote rasha v'gas ruach is shote is fool, rasha, evil, wicked, and gasroch and arrogant, right? So a person who gets into that position is all of those terrible things. Yes, Larry.
my concern is when you were reading that, I was thinking about jury duty, and how the quote quote smart thing to do is to avoid jury duty. It's tedious. You lose pay. You can wind up associating with the wrong sorts of people. If God forbid you got on the wrong trial, it could make a major effect on your life and so forth. But the fact remains that if we're going to have a system of justice, we need to have people with jury duty. And similarly, with this statement, what my thought is that these two things are sort of a contradiction. First one says, well, the smart thing to do for yourself is to avoid being a judge. But the second thing says, but if you do that, if everybody does that, the people who are left, the people who are judging not for the right reasons, are going to have these characteristics, and that's going to carry over into their rulings and into the society. So, I think that it, this bugs me. I'll throw that out. Maybe somebody can either reassure me or confirm that I'm not completely off base here.
Lee,
Well,
it's
yeah.
saying with being judgmental or being a judge? I was reading it as being judgmental. So he says that if you're if you refuse to be judgmental, if you keep from being judgmental, then you're not going to get involved in all this evil. But if you're presumptuous enough to be judgmental, then you're foolish, wicked, and arrogant. Is there something in the Hebrew that specifically?
Well, it seems here he's really talking about, especially if you look at the next Mishnah, which is arguably, part of the same, it's a continuation of the same thought. He's definitely talking about a dayan. He's talking about a person who is a judge. But I think, you know, he's talking about hagas libo, a person who becomes arrogant, right? Hagas libo is like a person who's literally like his heart grows fat. Okay, his heart grows, he's so it's a question of attitude. So if I come as a juror, right? If I come as a juror, for example, and you're right that it is a big responsibility. If I come as a juror, I have to come with a sense of humility. I have to understand, the importance of what it is that I'm doing and the gravity. I guess that's what I'm looking for. The gravity of what it is that I'm doing, and not think that, well, here I, not, oh wow, here I get to be judged. Look at me, right? And feeling some sense of pride in it, but feeling a sense of humility and taking care in it. Um, I think because when he says ghastly bova harab, his person, it's the arrogance that's really the problem. It's not just the judgment, but it's when the person comes to it with arrogance that they're foolish and so forth. So I think we could safely say that, yeah, you should do your jury duty, but you should do it with, respectfully and without arrogance. Um, Although I feel like they never put me on a jury. I was convinced that I would never get on a jury. And I had two things going against me in Orange County. One was that I wore a yarmulke. One was I wore a cap, which made me kind of like difficult to read, I guess, because you'll never know what kind of weird opinions religious people have. And second is I speak Spanish. And they were always every time I went to jury duty, they asked me if I speak Spanish, um, which which is interesting. In Orange County, California, they don't like people who speak Spanish on juries, because you're going to be listening to the speaker and not to the tra It's a whole weird thing. So, um, okay, number 10. Hu haya omer. So now we're continuing on the same vein. He's talking about the same thing. Sa'atahi dan liyechidi. Don't be a judge alone. Right? Don't be a single judge. She'en dan yechida ela echad. But because there is only one may judge alone, right? No one can judge. She'en dan yechida ela echad. There is no unique judge but one, right? The only one who can judge by themselves is God. So a human being, right? You shouldn't judge by yourself because you, of course, are subject to misunderstandings. You have to be able to your understandings, check your understanding with others. So you should always uh, you should always do with you should always judge with somebody else. V'al tamar says kabel dati says don't say accept my view, right? Shehen rashayim v'lo ata. He says for they are permitted, not you. Right? So if you were on, and here I think it's specifically talking about Shehain Rishayim v'lo ata, because Rishayim means that they have freedom of permission. So meaning that you can't take away somebody's freedom of choice like that, right? So you can't try to impose your view, right, on other people, right? So there's a difference between trying to convince somebody, right, and saying, accept my opinion blindly because of authority. So I think that he's talking here about, like, I suspect an argument from authority, right? I know better
I,
than you. Accept my opinion,
I mean,
without any kind of reasonable explanation. Um,
a couple of quick comments, if I could. Yeah, I mean, I think that what he's talking about here is the case where, a typical based in is a court of three,
right,
and
correct.
so, he's talking about the case where the Av Beit Din, where the leader of the Beit Din might be voting one way and the other two the other, he tries to use authority to change that. But I just wanted to mention that. As another example of Jewish law trying to avoid the argument from authority during the Sanhedrin, when people had to make a vote or to explain themselves, it was always done in reverse seniority order. The least senior person expressed their opinion first, precisely so that you did not wind up with the case where the most senior person spoke and then everybody just went along.
Yeah, which it's interesting. You see that dynamic so often. Um, I've been to, like, synagogue meetings, for example, and that happens all the time, right? The president, or the rabbi, especially, right, offers an opinion, and then nobody really differs from the opinion, and it stifles any kind of creativity, or certainly any kind of dissent. Um, but so this idea of not being a judge by yourself. I mean, I think it's also. I mean, yes, it is referring to like to a Beit Din of having three people, and so the head of the Beit Din shouldn't say, okay, you guys should agree with me because I'm the head of the Beit Din, because I'm the head. But also to be careful about, just on a personal level, to be careful about our judgments, and check in with other people, right? Because we don't have the omniscient uh, view of the world. There are a lot of things that we don't know that maybe somebody else knows, and so we shouldn't be acting as if we know everything. Right? Only God knows everything, right? And only God is able to judge without consulting other people. So we have to check in with other people. So Rabbi Yonatan said, "Kol mekayem et Torah me'ani." It says it says any person who keeps the Torah me'ani, from in poverty, sofo l'kaima me'osher, will eventually keep it in wealth. So if a person pursues Torah, um, even in poverty, eventually they'll be able to complete it in wealth. But he says, "V'kol mevatat Torah me'osher," and any person who neglects the Torah in wealth, sofo levatla me'oni. It says that in the end, the person will neglect it in poverty. I don't know whether this always plays out in reality. I think it's, I always wonder about these things because okay, does this always work? Um, uh, I don't know, but I guess the emphasis here is on the importance of respecting the Torah, and there is this idea, there is this idea of Torah being associated with simple living. I guess simple living, high thinking. Um, that we'll see later. There's a Mishnah that says a person, uh, you know, that about the life of Torah is just bread, salt, and sleeping on the floor. Bread and was it bread? Is it bread, pas melech? Trying to remember the Mishnah. We'll come to it. But this idea that there's a certain kind of simplicity that comes with learning Torah. And now, of course, in contemporary Jewish society, um, people who study Torah full time often live in dire poverty by choice. I mean, often live in real poverty by choice, whether that's a good idea or not. But uh, they're assured that they will eventually be able to live in wealth. Maybe that wealth is not a material wealth, maybe it's a spiritual wealth. Because remember the word ani here, right, means poverty, but it also means spiritual poverty. It's the most of all the words for poor, for poverty, it's the one that has the most spiritual connotation. It's the one that's least connected with financial wealth and financial lack of financial wealth, but also with lack of spiritual wealth or emotional well-being. So, um, okay, thoughts on that? I'm speeding through, but any thoughts, ideas?
I thought I had seen. I'm sorry. I really hate being the one who's speaking up all the time.
No,
Um,
it's nothing wrong with that. It's good.
but is it a possibility that will, you know, I mean, you have the same problem with this as with the second paragraph of the Shema and the promise of if you keep the mitzvot, you get the rain, and otherwise you get the drought. And similarly, I wonder if the interpretation of this is that even if you live a life of poverty with Torah in this world, then you can live in the assurance of a rich life in the world to come, and vice versa.
Right, there is that. I mean, definitely you could see it that way, right? Although it's interesting because you would think he might say that. And it's also hard to imagine what Osher, what sort of wealth looks like. I mean, it maybe, yeah. It's because very often, like when it talks about the world to come, you get more. Um, you know, for example, it says "vitovlach," and it will be good for you, right? And so tov, okay, that we can imagine the world to come. Osher, or wealth, right? Good, we can understand the world to come, but wealth, it's hard to understand because, and what would be the meaning of wealth? But Osher can also mean, I guess that it can also mean sort of well-being. It doesn't really have to mean material wealth. It could also mean well-being. So you might be right.
Can I say something on the pshat of it?
Yeah,
That if you if you're if you give up Torah because you think you're going to be that you'll do it when you're wealthy, and like that you're poor, you can't do it, then you're going to that's a problem, right? You're never going to do it. And if you say, well, I'm wealthy, so therefore I can neglect it, then that's
right,
also a problem.
right,
So it's sort of like almost like that there has to be a separation in your mind between Torah, not Torah, and poverty and wealth.
right, right. And also the bottom line is that it's your obligation to study. That's the bottom line. Whether you're poor, right? It's your obligation to study. And so you can't say, well, I'm so wealthy I have no time to study. That's not going to work. And you also can't say, I'm so poor I can't afford to study. But neither one of those is a good excuse. And and so we get Rabbi Meir, and he's on the same page. Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Meir says, "Have me'ad be'asek," says va'asok b'Torah. He says, reduce, right? Reduce your business activities, and so you can hear in the sound, met be'esek, and then asok, right? So it's the same verb. So reduce your worldly occupation and occupy yourself with Torah, which is so we don't just interesting that this is of course in the Ashkenazi version of the of Birkat Torah, of the prayers that we say, the Sephardim Edut Mizrach, they have a different version. But when we make a bracha, a prayer for learning Torah, we say la'asok b'divrei Torah, to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. We don't make a blessing, right? Asking God, right? Blessing God for learning Torah, but for busying ourselves in the words of Torah. And so, just as you would, my rabbi was very fond of this concept because I was a teacher, and I worked very, very, very hard. Okay, so I worked like crazy hours, right? I worked crazy hours. I was always preparing things. I was writing curriculum and all this stuff, and he was like, "Okay, so you know how to work." Right? He says, so you've proven that right, right? You prove that you know how to work, but now you have to work in Torah, right? Now you have to show that you can work in Torah. So you should reduce your worldly activities, your business activities, and instead you should work in the Torah, not just not just a passive learning, but something that you're supposed to be putting. Kind of imagine that it also is also implies a kind of an energy, right? To learning, we often think of as a kind of a passive thing, right? This is but to work in something is something very, very different. Havei shafa ruach b'fnei kol adam. It says have humility before everybody, before everyone. So interesting. So interesting that immediately after telling people that they should learn a lot of Torah, that they should have, right, remind them they should have humility. You have to remember that in his time, that a person who was studying Torah was at the top of the social food chain. And that was true in Jewish society, I think in general, in a lot of places for a lot of our history, is that if you were a scholar, right, if you were a scholar, that was a very big deal, and it kind of put you at the top of you got the best marriage choices, and you got honor in society, and so on. It was a big deal. So the first thing he reminds you is, okay, if you're not gonna work, if you're not gonna engage in a worldly occupation, and instead you're going to put work into Torah, make sure that your shafa ruach b'nei adam, have humility before everyone, before all people, right? V'im
It's
im batat min Torah, and if you neglect the Torah, it says yesh lecha. It says batel meharbin enecha. It says you will have. you, if you neglect the Torah, you'll have plenty of opportunities to neglect the Torah in front of you. Okay? Once you choose, right? Once you choose to do something, once you open the door to a particular behavior, then all of a sudden you'll see lots of opportunities. So if you have in your mind that I don't really want to study, you'll find lots of excuses not to study. You'll find lots of reasons not to do it, right? So this will get in the way and that will get in the way, and you won't feel good and you won't do there'll be plenty of things, and opportunities will come your way, financial opportunities, all sorts of things will come your way. And you say, no, 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 I'm too busy to do that. It says, but imamalta b'Torah says, but if you labored in the Torah, right? If you really put your effort into it, use a slightly different verb, amal, which means also to work, similar to asak. It's like I can't really think of exactly what the difference is. But imamalta b'Torah, if you labored in the Torah, I like that. It says, yesh lo schar harbe l'tenach. It says, a great reward will be given to you. Right? So it's you have to kind of, yes, if you if you decide that if you're going to be mevatel the Torah, to neglect the Torah, literally means to nullify the Torah. Right? There's no learning and not learning, by the way, right? There's learning and then there's being mevatel the Torah. There's learning and then there's nullifying the Torah, right? It's a neglect. So if you don't neglect the Torah and you work on it, he says you're going to get yesh lo schar harbe l'ten lecha. There's lots of reward. I would even say that you might want to understand if just as a parallelism here, but lots of rewards, or lots of opportunity for reward probably is a better way of understanding it. So the bottom line is, don't forget to learn Torah. So far, you're doing really well. You're already fulfilling your obligation right at this moment. So you can feel, but not with arrogance. Shafa ruach kol adam. So you should be humble before all people. So after you leave here, don't go running off and lording it over other people. I just learned Pirkei Avot, but. Um, at least you can say that at least you did that. Let's do one more. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, ha'osa mitzvah achat kono lo praklit echad. I can't remember where this word praklit. Praklit is Greek, actually. It's a Greek word, and it means a legal advocate. It actually occurs many times in the New Testament. It occurs many times in the New Testament, which is interesting. So a person who does one mitzvah acquires for themselves an advocate. So it's as if the mitzvah testifies on your behalf, right? It becomes your personal lawyer, right? That mitzvah, the commandment that you do, right, now functions as your lawyer. Ha'over avera achad, a person who commits one avera, one transgression, konelo kategor achad, and that's another Greek word. A kategor is a prosecutor, right? So you get a defense attorney. Okay, so the mitzvah that you did is your defense attorney, and your sin is your prosecuting attorney, right? So when you go to trial, right, they're going to show up with teshuva masim tovim, says as a kitris mivnei puranut, and says, and good deeds, tshuva, repentance, and ma'asim tuvim, good deeds. Okay, Yitzchak b'fnei ha'poranut. They will be a shield against punishment. So we have this on the one hand, you say, okay, it's very black and white. I did good things and I did bad things. The good things the good things I did, they become praklit. They become my defense attorney. This is the bad things I did, they become my kategor. They become the prosecuting attorney, the district attorney. And basically they're going to battle it out. But then he says, Shuva masim tovim, says, but when a person repents, when they turn back to God, and when they do good deeds, this is a shield against the punishment. So however it turns out, right? However it turns out, there's there's a, by correcting yourself, right? That will protect you from the punishment, even if it comes out not in your favor. So there's a way around the system, so to speak, right? Repentance and good deeds, right? Um, can get you out of this weighing of the argument between your defense attorney and your prosecuting attorney. Okay. So what do we think? Anybody thoughts about prosecuting attorneys? There's a
I was going to say in connection to that, there's also the Mishnah that says that you don't know the value of a mitzvah.
right,
Okay, we have a lot of Hasidic stories about guy who goes to heaven and there's a vision or whatever, and you have the Hasatan Satan with all this big long list of sins, and then you have either you defend yourself or your attorney defends you, your Rebbe defends you, etc. And the thing that happens in a lot of these stories, which are teaching stories, is that some mitzvah that you might have thought was some minor little thing has set up a a ripple effect, so to speak. You might have done who knows what in it. I just read a story recently about a kid. There was this kid he was being picked on in school, and this other kid is walking by and sees all his books on the ground because the other kids pushed him over and all of this other kind of stuff. So the second kid stops and says hi to the first kid, picks up the books, walks him home, whatever. And years later, when the kid with the books ends up being the class valedictorian, and he
mm,
says to the group, he tells that story. He said, I cleaned out my locker because I didn't want my mother to have to do it. He had been picked on and bullied so much, he was planning suicide that day. But the act of this other kid helping him out and walking him home, eventually they became friends, prevented that. Okay. So you don't really know what your little action, your little kindness, your little mitzvah might do in a kind of a ripple effect. So that in a lot of these stories, when this trial happens in the other world, um, you find out that this what you thought was a minor thing, because the guy at the time just kind of thought I helped the kid pick up his books. I walked him home. We got to know each other. He had no idea that he saved a life.
right, right.
So I'm just throwing that out there. That's
Yeah,
the other
and
part of it. We don't know the value of a mitzvah
yeah.
until
I,
we do.
actually, I mean, there's Muslims also have these stories, right? There's famous story of I think it was a prostitute who was saved from hell because she fed a dog. She gave water. I think she gave water to a dog. I mean, so yeah, the stories are that all of a sudden this mitzvah kind of gets in the last minute it comes running. But wait, there's this. Um, so I wish everybody a beautiful day. I hope that we all have a day full of learning and mitzvot, and that.
Malka has something to say.
Yes, Malka.
Can't tell me I'm in charge of reminding you about the schmooze and then expect me not to follow up.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that reminds me, I will schedule the schmooze. Okay, so I'll send out a thing. Uh, and a schmooze is just a more informal talk so we can just sort of take questions, schmooze around, think about some things that have kind of come up over, in various classes, but kind of moved on, but I want to continue talking. So we'll make time for schmooze. Okay, thank you, Malco, for reminding me. I appreciate it. You're the schmooze director extraordinaire. Okay, have a beautiful day. I'll be back for duties of the heart tomorrow, and I promise I'll be much more awake. And I even look tired. I even look like I'm falling asleep. So I'll be more awake tomorrow. Bezrat Hashem. No napping before class. Okay, have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
Bye.